I never imagined the love of my life could betray me so cruelly, especially with my best friend. The moment I walked into that room and saw them together, my world shattered. Their whispers, the guilt in their eyes. I'll never forget it. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But what came next? That was the real shocker. My name is Emily, and I thought I had everything. A loving husband, Ryan, and a best friend, Claire, who had been like a sister to me since childhood. Ryan was my rock, always making me laugh even on my worst days, while Claire was the one who stood by me through thick and thin. Together, they were the two most important people in my life, the ones I trusted above all else. We were inseparable, our bond unshakable, or so I thought. Life seemed perfect. Ryan and I had been married for 5 years, and our relationship was built on what I believed was unbreakable trust. We shared a cozy little home in the suburbs, filled with laughter and dreams of starting a family. Claire was a constant presence in our lives, joining us for dinners, vacations, and lazy weekends. She was the godmother to our future children, the person I would have trusted with my life. I often found myself marveling at how lucky I was. Ryan adored me, or at least, I thought he did. He would leave little notes in my bag, reminding me how much he loved me. Claire, too, seemed genuinely happy for us, always joking about how she hoped to find a love like ours someday. I had no reason to doubt either of them. They were my safe space, the people I believed would never hurt me. But looking back, there were cracks I refused to see. Ryan had started working late more often, brushing off my concerns with excuses about deadlines. Claire, usually so attentive, had grown distant, canceling our regular coffee dates and avoiding my calls. I dismissed these changes as life getting in the way. After all, we were adults, busy with our own lives. I didn't want to seem paranoid or controlling. Still, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. I told myself I was being silly, that I was overthinking things. I buried my doubts beneath layers of trust, ignoring the subtle shifts in their behavior. I had no idea that these small, seemingly insignificant changes were the prelude to the most painful betrayal of my life. The first red flag came on a quiet Wednesday evening. Ryan, who was usually glued to his phone for work emails, quickly locked his screen when I walked into the room. "Just work stuff," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. I laughed it off, not wanting to seem insecure. But something about his tone gnawed at me, a subtle unease I couldn't shake. Claire, too, started acting strangely. She, who once shared every detail of her life with me, had grown reserved. Our long conversations over coffee turned into rushed meetings where she seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone. When I teased her about it, she brushed it off with a nervous laugh, saying she was just busy. For the first time in years, I felt like an outsider in her life. The distance between us became more evident during our weekend gatherings. Ryan and Claire always got along, sharing the same dry humor that often left me rolling my eyes. But now, their interactions felt different. Their laughter lingered a bit too long, their glances holding a silent exchange that made me feel invisible. I tried to dismiss my growing suspicions, convincing myself that I was overanalyzing. But then, there was the night Ryan forgot our dinner plans. He claimed he'd been caught up in a work meeting and couldn't make it home in time. It wasn't unusual for his schedule to shift, but when I called his office, the receptionist informed me that he had left hours earlier. My chest tightened as I hung up the phone, trying to process the implications. Where had he gone? The puzzle pieces started falling into place when I found Claire's scarf in Ryan's car a few days later. She hadn't been over in weeks, so how could it have ended up there? My mind raced as I stared at it, a pit forming in my stomach. When I confronted Ryan about it, he shrugged it off with a flimsy excuse, claiming she must have left it during a group outing. His dismissiveness only deepened my doubts. My breaking point came when Claire canceled on me yet again, claiming she was too busy with work. Later that evening, while scrolling through social media, I stumbled upon a tagged photo of her at a nearby restaurant. She wasn't alone. Ryan was sitting beside her, their heads close together, sharing what looked like an intimate conversation. My heart pounded as I stared at the image, my mind reeling with betrayal. I didn't confront them right away. Instead, I started observing, piecing together the little inconsistencies in their stories. Ryan's late nights, Claire's sudden aloofness, the stolen glances, and secretive behavior. It all painted a picture I couldn't ignore. The people I trusted most were hiding something from me, and I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. The tension in my home grew unbearable. Every time Ryan's phone buzzed, I wondered if it was Claire on the other end. Every time Claire avoided my gaze, I questioned whether she was hiding guilt. The walls seemed to close in around me, suffocating me with doubts and unanswered questions. I needed to know the truth, even if it destroyed me. One evening, while Ryan was in the shower, I unlocked his phone, a move I never thought I'd stoop to. My hands trembled as I scrolled through his messages, my heart sinking with every line of flirtatious texts exchanged with Claire. There was no denying it now. They had crossed a line I could never forgive. The betrayal was real, and it was staring me in the face. My world, once so secure and filled with love, was crumbling beneath me. And the worst part? I didn't know what to do next. The day I discovered the messages, I felt like I was living in a surreal nightmare. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. My thoughts were consumed by the betrayal. Ryan and Claire, the two people I trusted more than anyone, had broken something inside me that could never be repaired. But what I didn't expect was how this pain would manifest into something even more complicated. I avoided Ryan as much as I could in the days that followed. Each time I saw him, I felt a pang of anger and heartbreak. He still smiled at me, kissed me goodnight, and acted as if everything was fine. But I couldn't bring myself to confront him yet. I needed more than just text messages. I needed to catch him in the act, to make them face the reality of what they had done to me. One evening, I found myself scrolling through Claire's social media again. There were no new photos, no incriminating posts, just the usual curated updates of her life. But as I stared at her pictures, I couldn't help but feel something unexpected. A strange, burning envy. Claire had always been beautiful, effortlessly charming, the kind of person who lit up every room she entered. And now she had Ryan too. I hated her for what she had done, but I couldn't stop comparing myself to her. Was I not enough? Was there something she had that I didn't? These questions gnawed at me, feeding a dark, simmering resentment that I couldn't shake. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was a mix of jealousy, insecurity, and something else I didn't dare name. The confrontation I had been dreading came sooner than I anticipated. One evening, Ryan came home late, reeking of perfume that wasn't mine. My stomach churned as I tried to suppress the rage building inside me. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound calm. "Work," he replied, too quickly, avoiding my eyes. I crossed my arms, refusing to let him off the hook. "You expect me to believe that, when you smell like that?" His face fell, and for the first time I saw panic in his eyes. "Emily, it's not what you think," he started, but I cut him off. "Don't lie to me, Ryan. I've seen the messages. I know about Claire." The silence that followed was deafening. His shoulders slumped, and he let out a heavy sigh, as if the weight of his lies had finally become too much to bear. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "Didn't mean for what to happen?" I snapped, my voice rising. "To betray me? To destroy our marriage?" Before he could answer, the doorbell rang. My heart sank as I walked to the door, already knowing who it would be. Sure enough, there stood Claire, her face pale and her eyes wide with guilt. She didn't say a word as I stepped aside to let her in, the tension in the air so thick it was suffocating. The three of us sat in the living room, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. Claire tried to speak first, her voice trembling. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow. "You never wanted to hurt me? Then why did you do it? Why betray me like this?" She had no answer, only tears streaming down her face as she looked to Ryan for support. But he had nothing to offer her. He looked just as lost and broken as she did. Watching them together, their shared guilt and unspoken connection made something snap inside me. "You two deserve each other," I spat, rising from my seat. "But don't think for a second that I'm going to make this easy for you." I stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind me as tears blurred my vision. But as I stood in the quiet of the hallway, something shifted. The anger and heartbreak I felt began to morph into a strange, forbidden feeling. An ache not just for the loss of my husband, but for the betrayal itself. It was as if their affair had awoken something dormant within me, a yearning for something deeper, more dangerous. I didn't know how to process these emotions, but I couldn't ignore them. The lines between love, hate, and desire blurred, leaving me grappling with feelings I didn't understand. What I did know was that the dynamic between us, the tangled web of betrayal and longing, was far from over. And deep down, a part of me didn't want it to be. The confrontation was inevitable, and I knew that the web of lies Ryan and Claire had spun around me was about to unravel completely. After that agonizing evening in the living room, I resolved to find the missing pieces of the truth. I needed to see the full picture before I could decide how to move forward. The pain was unbearable, but I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. 2 days later, I told Ryan I was heading to visit my sister in another town. It was a lie, but I needed space to execute my plan. As I packed a small bag, he seemed relieved, almost eager for me to leave. That reaction only confirmed what I already suspected. He was planning to see Claire. Once I was gone, I parked my car a few blocks from the house and waited in the shadows. Hours passed, and just when I began to doubt myself, Claire's car pulled into the driveway. My heart raced as she stepped out, glancing nervously around before heading to the front door. She had a key. My stomach turned at the realization of how comfortable they had become in my absence. I crept closer, staying hidden in the bushes by the side of the house. From the living room window, I could see them talking, their body language speaking volumes. Claire rested her hand on Ryan's arm, and he responded by pulling her into an embrace. The way he held her, it was tender, intimate, everything I had once thought was reserved for me. I couldn't look away, even as it felt like my heart was being ripped to shreds. When their lips met, something inside me snapped. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a complete erasure of everything we had built together. They kissed as if I didn't exist, as if the life we shared was nothing more than a distant memory. I wanted to burst into the room, to scream and demand answers, but I stopped myself. Instead, I pulled out my phone and began recording. If they thought they could gaslight me into doubting what I'd seen, I would have proof. The recording was my ticket to the truth, but it didn't make the pain any less excruciating. I sat in my car, trembling as I watched the video over and over. Each time I felt the same surge of anger, heartbreak, and humiliation. How could they do this to me? And why couldn't I walk away? Despite everything, part of me still clung to the hope that I could salvage some semblance of my old life. The next morning, I returned home as if nothing had happened. Ryan greeted me with a smile, the same fake warmth he had used to mask his betrayal. I played along, pretending to be oblivious while I plotted my next move. I needed them both in the same room, where they couldn't deny the evidence I had. That evening, I invited Claire over for dinner. She hesitated at first, likely sensing that something was amiss, but I insisted. "It's been so long since we've had a proper girls' night," I said, forcing a cheerful tone. Ryan chimed in, adding that he'd love to catch up with her. The irony of his enthusiasm wasn't lost on me. When Claire arrived, she was visibly uneasy. Her eyes darted between me and Ryan, as if searching for clues about whether I knew their secret. I kept up the facade, chatting casually as we sat down to eat. But the tension in the room was palpable, the unspoken truth hanging over us like a storm cloud. Halfway through dinner, I decided it was time. I set down my fork and folded my hands on the table, looking directly at Claire. "So," I began, my voice calm but firm, "how long have you and Ryan been seeing each other behind my back?" The color drained from her face, and Ryan froze, his fork suspended midair. "Emily, I don't know what you're talking about," Claire stammered, her voice shaky. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table, the video queued up and ready to play. "Don't insult my intelligence," I said, my tone sharp. "I've seen everything." I pressed play, and the room was filled with the damning evidence of their affair. Ryan's expression shifted from shock to defeat, while Claire buried her face in her hands. Neither of them spoke. The weight of their betrayal finally laid bare. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "You are my husband, Ryan. And you, Claire, you are my best friend. How could you? How could either of you?" Ryan finally spoke, his voice low and filled with regret. "Emily, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." "You didn't want to hurt me?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "Do you think that excuse is what you did? You destroyed everything." Claire looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what to say. I never meant for this to happen." "Save it," I snapped. "Your intentions don't matter. The damage is done." The confrontation devolved into a cacophony of apologies and justifications, but none of it mattered. Their words couldn't undo the pain they had caused or the trust they had shattered. By the end of the night, I was emotionally drained, my heart heavy with the weight of their betrayal. As they left, I stood alone in the empty house, the silence deafening. My marriage, my friendship, my entire life, it was all in ruins. But as I sat in the wreckage of my world, a strange sense of clarity began to take hold. This was the end of one chapter, but it didn't have to be the end of my story. The truth had been exposed, and while it hurt more than I could have ever imagined, it also set me free. Free to rebuild, to find myself again, and to create a life where I was no longer defined by the people who had betrayed me. After the confrontation, the house felt emptier than ever. Ryan had left that night, carrying a hastily packed bag and muttering apologies I didn't care to hear. Claire, too, disappeared from my life, leaving behind a single text message. "I'm sorry for everything." I didn't reply. Her words felt hollow, incapable of undoing the destruction she had caused. The following days passed in a haze. The silence in the house was deafening, the absence of Ryan's presence a constant reminder of his betrayal. I had never considered myself the type to crumble under pressure, but this time was different. My foundation had been rocked to its core. Every memory we had built together was tainted now, twisted by the knowledge of what he had done. I couldn't help but replay the betrayal in my mind, dissecting every moment leading up to it. Were there signs I had ignored? Could I have done something differently? These questions haunted me, and no matter how hard I tried to suppress them, they came back with a vengeance each night when I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Eventually, the anger began to seep in, replacing the overwhelming sadness. I was furious, at Ryan, at Claire, but mostly at myself for trusting them so blindly. I had built my life around them, given them pieces of myself I couldn't get back. Now, I was left to pick up the shattered remains alone. One day, as I stood in front of the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Her eyes were dull, her face drawn and tired. I realized then that I couldn't let their betrayal define me. I had to take back control of my life, to find a way to move forward despite the pain. The first step was practical: the divorce. I contacted a lawyer and began the grueling process of ending my marriage. Each meeting was a reminder of what I had lost, but it was also a step toward reclaiming my independence. Ryan didn't contest anything. His guilt seemed to paralyze him, and he quietly signed every document without a fight. By the end of it, the legal ties that bound us were severed, leaving me with a bittersweet sense of relief. Next came the emotional healing, which proved far more challenging. I started therapy, hoping to make sense of the chaos in my mind. My therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Carter, encouraged me to focus on myself for the first time in years. "You've spent so much of your life giving to others," she said during one session. "Now it's time to give back to yourself." Her words struck a chord, and slowly, I began to make changes. I redecorated the house, removing every trace of Ryan and Claire. Their photos came down, their gifts were boxed up, and I even repainted the walls to erase the memories that clung to them. It was cathartic, a physical representation of the emotional boundaries I was trying to build. But healing wasn't a straight path. There were moments when the grief returned, sharp and unrelenting. The holidays were especially difficult, reminders of the traditions we had shared as a couple. I spent Christmas alone that year, curled up on the couch with a blanket and a bottle of wine. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and that was enough for the time being. Over time, I began to rebuild my social circle. Friends I hadn't seen in years reached out, offering support and companionship. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I was loved and valued even when I didn't feel like it. Slowly, I began to trust again, letting people into my life cautiously, one step at a time. Perhaps the most surprising change came in the form of a new passion. I had always loved painting, but had let it fall by the wayside during my marriage. One afternoon, I dug out my old supplies and began to create again. The act of putting brush to canvas was liberating, a way to channel my emotions into something tangible. My paintings became an outlet, a way to process the pain and find beauty in it. As the weeks turned into months, I noticed a shift within myself. The sadness that had once consumed me began to fade, replaced by a quiet strength. I wasn't the same person I had been before the betrayal, but in many ways, I was stronger, more self-assured. I had faced the worst and survived, and that realization filled me with a sense of resilience I hadn't known I possessed. By the time the anniversary of the confrontation rolled around, I no longer felt the weight of Ryan and Claire's betrayal. It was still a part of my story, but it didn't define me anymore. I had reclaimed my life, my identity, and my sense of self-worth. And in doing so, I had found a kind of peace I hadn't thought possible. As I stood in my newly transformed living room, surrounded by the warmth of my friends and the soft glow of the paintings I had created, I realized something important. Life had gone on. I had gone on. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. The months following the betrayal had been some of the hardest of my life, but as I stood on the other side of it, I felt a sense of clarity I never expected. The heartbreak, the anger, and even the moments of hopelessness had shaped me into someone stronger, someone more in tune with herself. In the quiet moments, I reflected on what I had learned. Betrayal has a way of stripping away illusions, forcing you to confront not only the truth about others, but also about yourself. For years, I had poured everything into my relationships with Ryan and Claire, neglecting my own needs and desires. I thought that love meant giving selflessly, but I realize now that true love, whether for a partner, a friend, or yourself, needs balance. It needs boundaries and mutual respect. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. Anger had served its purpose, propelling me forward when I felt like giving up. But holding on to it would have only tied me to the people who had hurt me. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing their actions. It was about freeing myself from the weight of their betrayal. Letting go was my way of reclaiming my peace. As I moved forward, I began to rebuild my life in ways that honored my newfound strength. I leaned into my passion for painting, creating works that spoke to the journey I had been on. One piece, in particular, became a centerpiece in my home. A vivid, abstract swirl of reds, golds, and deep blues that symbolized pain, healing, and resilience. Every time I looked at it, I was reminded of how far I had come. Friendships became another source of joy and healing. The people who stood by me during my darkest moments became my lifeline, their unwavering support a reminder that I was never truly alone. I also opened myself up to new relationships, learning to trust again, albeit cautiously. Each connection, no matter how small, felt like a step toward rebuilding the community I had lost. One afternoon, while sorting through old photos, I came across a picture of Ryan, Claire, and me from happier times. For a moment, I considered tossing it away, but I decided against it. Instead, I placed it in a box labeled Past. It wasn't that I wanted to hold on to the pain, but I didn't want to erase the good times either. They were a part of my story, a chapter that had ended but still held lessons I would carry with me. Through therapy and introspection, I learned to value myself in ways I hadn't before. I realized that my worth wasn't tied to how others treated me, but to how I treated myself. The betrayal had broken me, yes, but it had also given me the opportunity to rebuild on a foundation of self-respect and self-love. As the seasons changed, so did I. I found joy in the little things again. A warm cup of tea on a chilly morning, the feel of a paintbrush in my hand, the laughter of friends gathered around my table. These moments reminded me that life wasn't defined by the pain of the past, but by the beauty of the present and the promise of the future. If I could leave others with one lesson, it would be this: heartbreak, no matter how devastating, doesn't have to be the end. It can be a beginning, a chance to rediscover who you are and what you're capable of. Pain is inevitable, but so is growth, if you allow it. Ryan and Claire were no longer a part of my life, but their betrayal had taught me something invaluable. It had shown me the strength I didn't know I had, the resilience that carried me through, and the importance of prioritizing my own happiness. In the end, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. If you've ever faced betrayal, how did you find the strength to move forward? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to join me for more powerful stories of resilience and growth. And stay tuned. Our next story will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love and trust. You won't want to miss it.